It's what lies below, yeah, and beneath, which is uh, Michael Fullen, who is I think he was professor in education in Ontario, 2004. When I gave some input, and he said, uh, "You're a systems thinker in action, Damien." Well, I like that, so it's on my X profile. Um, but actually, that best describes what we do. There is an intellectual underpinning which has absolutely no use at all unless you actually look to manifest it and learn from it through the work. Yeah. So that has been a sort of a mantra really. But if you're not careful, there's lots of people who crave labels or jump on bandwagons. And, and
Yeah,
let's be honest, none of us have come up with anything novel. We've begged, borrowed and stolen from other places,
yeah,
but we're not, but it has to survive some intellectual rigor that is proofed through the place, because there's a lot of transplant stuff that bounces off the surface, and unless you honour the place and understand it deeply and the
mm,
people within it, then actually all you're doing is abstracting from somebody else and then claiming it after the event. And we might do that with certain degrees of work that we have, because we're also quite pragmatic. Because coming back to the reason why it's taken us 6 months is that if you'd asked me a year ago, would we be dealing with what we're dealing with in our strategic environment, I'd have said possibly, but would I have been able to characterise and articulate the impact of it? No,
mm,
which has been quite disruptive. Not all negatively, but it has
yeah.
undoubtedly altered the authorising environment and state in which we've worked, and that is a useful kick in the butt, I suppose, around don't assume anything, but be adaptive and aware, and work with what you've got, uh, and not just what you've got, but where you're at, and sometimes you just have to make small bets. Uh, Nothing happens immediately.
Well, introduction is very short. It's Benjamin Taylor here from the Public Service Transformation Academy, and I'm really pleased to be sharing an online space with Lee Tillman and Damien Allen from Doncaster, City of Doncaster Council. And the reason I wanted to spend some time with you was to hear your story, your successes, your overall approach, your deeper thinking behind it, and some of the challenges you've faced in doing what I think is a bit of an unsung example of real locality, place-based, relational services. Perhaps I could invite you to start by saying, how would you describe what you've achieved in Doncaster over the last few years, and what are the main aspects that you're proud of?
I'll kick off if I may. And I think one of the things that we've done is built upon our key strength, which I think is partnership working across the whole place. And we've particularly, and I'll characterise it because it's a 10-year project based on our mission of thriving people, places and planet. That's the Mayor's sort of mission for her 10-year borough strategy. And it wouldn't work unless Team Doncaster, that's public, private and voluntary sector, was all committed to the same mission. Yeah. But you've got to get beyond the mantra, and you've got to get into the place. And the place for us is the deep neighbourhoods, particularly those that have got enduring generational challenges. And therefore, what we've sought to do is build a nested place-based partnership over that 10 years. We're halfway through that now, 5 years in. And fundamentally, not just around the description of what a neighbourhood is, but looking at the mode of how we work in that neighbourhood, but also how that mode operates across the whole of the partnership. And for us, that's best described as, we call it our Thrive model, which is based around a relational approach to public services. But it's also melded around an asset-based community development model and a wellbeing model that we've been growing over the past 10 years. And it's doing that in the place, with the place, by the place, less about for and to the place. And the first thing I'll say is it's not perfect, it's hard, it takes time, and we've had to learn from our mistakes. And that's a work in progress. So that's where, that might not sound grand, there isn't a model with 5 steps and a set of tools that we're flogging. It's just the everyday work, and we're doing it in a complex, challenging, and often unpredictable environment. If we're thinking about some of the authorising environment in terms of politics, but what we have done is build some, I think, capacity, and we understand the conditions that we're working with. So, that durability is really important. It's been 10 years since I've been here, and it is a progressive approach over those 10 years. And I think not everywhere can really have the benefit of knowing how it is you build a learning environment over 10 years to be able to create the capacities and capabilities within your teams and across your partners. But fundamentally, it has only any benefit if it results in any change and difference in those neighbourhoods. And we've got a number of examples that we're more than happy to share.
Well, yeah, I hear loads of things I'd love to dig deeper into there, but let's cut to the nuts and bolts briefly. What does a citizen experience differently because of the Thrive model? What's changed in decision making? How resources are used? How frontline teams work? What are the examples that most communicate what it's all about for you?
Yeah, sure. So translating that kind of vision and that aspiration and that partnership, we've got a sort of set of mechanisms and partnership spaces, if you like, through where the work is done. So across Doncaster we have 5 localities, so north, south, central, city centre and east, and we have exec director leadership sponsorship for each of those 5 localities. We have locality managers in each of those localities. We have locality partnerships, which is basically partners across Team Doncaster coming together to meet the needs of residents and communities, informed by a huge amount of voice. So each of our 5 localities has priorities cast against our plan that Damien mentioned, our 10-year plan, so Doncaster Delivering Together. And we call them delivery networks because they're not meetings, they're not structures, they're ways that partners come together to support the delivery of very, very tailored, bespoke and contextually significant priorities in each locality. And again, that's not easy, but that's about becoming greater than the sum of our parts. It's about building relationships between and within organisations and partners, because that's again something we take for granted. Everything we've described so far is built on that ability for those relationships to develop and flourish. And we have focus, that brings focus. So just give you 2 or 3 quick examples. So the area that I sort of lead as an exec director sponsor is the north locality. We've done a huge amount of work around off-road bikes, for example, and not just tackling that from a kind of enforcement perspective, but what are the things that are impacting and causing and contributing to that challenge. So everything from how bikes access and enter and leave particular spaces, to youth diversionary activities, to how we track and monitor and understand where the activity is happening and why it's happening. So that's one example. Another really good example would be around the work we've done on future parks. So how do we improve our green spaces? So again, this is the beauty of the model in terms of how we fold in different policy initiatives into this infrastructure to support what we're trying to achieve. So we've done lots of work as a Sport England delivery pilot to improve sport and physical activity and increase it in Doncaster. We have a programme called Get Doncaster Moving, and we've used our local delivery networks to coordinate the engagement, to convene partners around how we improve some of those spaces. And then what we have at the very hyper-local level is our 6 regenerative neighbourhoods, which are our sort of neighbourhoods where we're focusing at a very hyper-local level. And we've got those across the city. And we've got regenerative neighbourhood managers whose role is to, again, convene partners and the voluntary and community sector in those spaces. And again, we could probably talk about some of the examples. So it's that nestedness that Damien mentioned, right from the very sort of top line as what we're trying to achieve as a city, right through to what does that mean in individual places across Doncaster.
And I think it's also worth just adding that it's founded on a huge amount of insight and information, so for each of those 5 localities, there's a locality profile, and we've mapped our 83 neighbourhoods across the city, and we've done appreciative inquiry in each one of those. Yeah, and we've got a cycle of that. So it's not just looking at the service performance. It's not just looking at resident feedback. It's also looking at a much deeper insight-driven, and we do a lot of ethnographic and sectoral and particular targeted group work as well, and we've a lot of investment. The challenge, of course, is how you utilise that evidence and information in a way that both helps you with the activities that Lee's talked about, but also helps build progress. And one of the big challenges, I think, is that there's a lot of formal knowledge that tends to get grabbed into case management systems, etc., to meet the regulatory and accountability frameworks that we operate in. But what we don't privilege is the tacit or implicit information that obviously comes out of those conversations, particularly if you're looking at the relational interface between service users and services. And indeed, that's the sort of language that we're trying to get away from. In fact, we're trying to be much more human in that interface, and to privilege the individuals as being sort of experts in their own lives, and that tonal approach, that is a different shift, if you like, is part of the cultural challenge, not just within our own services, but across other public sector partners as well.
Let me dig into. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on, Lee.
No, go on, Benjamin. No, go for it.
Well, when you were giving those examples, one thing that struck me is they are not the mainstream things that local government is focused on by its performance indicators, but they are the things that matter to people. I've recently, within the last year, moved to Lancing in Ada and Worthing in West Sussex. And the thing that just popped up on the Facebook group this week was very active, and it's of the nature of the guy by Asda who's homeless and begging. He's called John, and he's got an alcohol problem, and I'm trying to get him into a local place. And can other people be nice to him, buy him a cup of tea? It's great stuff. And it was dirt bikes. It was actually e-motorbikes, and that typically doesn't fall into the things that any of the partners are targeted on. So I want to go in maybe two directions. So I'll just throw them both at you and see how you respond. The first is I want to dig into organisational learning across partners, because you highlighted that, Damien, as very, very, well, both those aspects as very important. And the second, I'm really interested in how you got here, because there's a great tension between future parks and dirt bikes and appreciative inquiry about what's important to people in the most disconnected neighbourhoods and the stuff that, as a sort of typical head of service in local government, you've got a lot of natural pressure to focus on around your mainstream budget, your mainstream PIs and so on. So can you pick up some threads from that and run with it?
So I start, Damien, on some of the learning stuff, because we've tried to and have deliberately done so. We've prioritised learning and talked consciously and openly about learning in a whole range of different ways. So when we bring our leadership team together, we talk about learning. When we talk in our development conversations, which are the replacements for our old-fashioned PDRs, we talk about what have you learned over the last 12 months, what have you learned about yourself, what have you learned about your teams, what have you learned about the organisation, etc. So I think the first thing is we've more intentionally brought, and this is a work in progress. It's not we've done it. It's more consciously bringing that learning sort of role and language in. We've also, and you've mentioned about cross partners. What's been really fundamental for us is we've introduced something called the Learning and Development Network for Thrive. So it's been going for 18 months or so now, meets every quarter, and that is a space where partners from across the whole of Team Doncaster come together and share their learning. And it's not just a kind of free-for-all where everyone just comes and says what they want necessarily, but we have sort of structured inputs around particular things that's been going on across the city over that last period, and then we draw out what have we learned from it, what have we noticed, what do you make of that, what does it mean to you in each of the individual sections, and then we draw that all together at the end and say, well, what does that tell us about what we've learned? Nice. So what that does is it sparks connections and it sparks greater curiosity, and what's been really interesting about that is the sort of laterality and the connections that have emerged as a result of those meetings and those conversations that we have, and we want to continue and embed that learning. The other thing which we're trying to do to embed this further is we're just refreshing our leadership and management framework as an organisation, and we've been really clear that all the stuff we're talking about won't stick. And you mentioned sustainability in your intro, Benjamin. Is it won't stick without that organisational development wrapper, if you like, that's going to hold it, embed it, and sort of turbocharge it in effect. So we've co-produced a leadership and management framework with our teams, and that's just being sort of crystallised into a curricula that brings a lot of the things we've talked about, the concepts that we've talked about, into the way we do things around here much more systematically. And we've got an HDRC, Health Determinants Research Collaboration, which is really helping us to embed some of that further. So I think that learning and that in a whole range of different ways and being really conscious about it is absolutely fundamental to the approach. And we know it's going to be never done. That's the other thing. Yeah. It's going to keep iterating and keep maturing as we go forward. Sorry, Damien.
I think the human learning systems theory, which underpins relational approaches, learning's adaptive by instinct, but actually what we tend to do is the opposite. We try and fix things, and have them fixed in time and space, irrespective of what the evidence and the information and the presenting behaviours. So there is an element of bespoke by design, if you like, which requires you to iterate your learning rather than having a fixed model, and that requires you to have a disposition to understand that things have to emerge through the work. And what also emerges through the work is the significance of context in helping shape meaning. And that comes back to how would you know? And those conversations that affect change, if you like, that have a currency of that change, allow you to see that bespokeness through the language and the dialogue that comes out, not all of which is usually captured in case notes when you're looking to, in what way is this a defensible decision, or one that enables me to create an assessment that gets access to a particular level of resource or need that is being met. So a good example of that is looking at some difficult problems. And I mean, if we look at Conisbrough, which is one of those regenerative neighbourhoods, and we're looking at primary care, for instance, and we know that when we've looked at the design of the prescribing around fibromyalgia, for instance, you end up with, I think, about 600 odd people that are suffering chronic pain, but actually a larger number of them are on the inappropriate medications, because that's the habitual medication. It's not actually relieving the pain, when actually looking at it through the lens of a health coach and a peer support worker is a slightly different lens. And actually we're starting to see that the referral patterns are starting to shift. Equally, if we look in other places where, that bit about asset-based community development, we're not always the best organisation to sort of lead the change in the place, because we don't hold the relationships. So in Edlington, particularly in what we call the Royal Estate, where we know we've got particular challenges around 3 streets, that's how hyperlocal we're talking about. Actually, the organisation best to lead that is one of the multi-academy trusts that has 2 schools, because they've got generations of relationships with the people who have been in that place. But one of the big presenting conditional factors for us, which is different in other parts and other neighbourhoods, is that in those 3 streets there's about 30 to 8 or so different private landlords. Yep. So we don't own so we've had to literally go house by house, find absentee landlords, and we've had to build a community of interest to say, tell you what is it that's preventing you from investing in the quality or renovating this derelict house, because it's obviously having a big issue, it's an attraction for drugs and crime, and then to bend into that shape what has some features of positive police work in terms of their clear, hold and build. A little bit, we've sort of bent the 3 Horizons model into this and said, tell you what, let's use that model, because it's both developmental. There's elements of clear, hold and build all at the same time. But at the moment, unless we build trust and win back the confidence of the residents, we're not going to be able to shift. So we've had whole estate clear-up days, for instance, which builds confidence that actually services are supporting. What that's done is build a self-organising landlords alliance. We've put a small amount of investment in there. We've tidied up the place, and funnily enough, the crime's reduced. The confidence has improved. School attendance is improving. Can you see? This takes a whole place, whole person, whole system approach in a micro sort of way. But actually, all we've done is create the support to the conditions with some resources, because we don't get big policy levers that say, "Tell you what, clear the whole estate and start afresh," which would in itself only be a temporal solution. So what we've taken out of that model, which has been going for 3 years, and that's what I mean about it takes time, and we're not just going to transplant that into somewhere else, because if we went to Highfields, the housing stock is largely social housing owned. It's got different conditions that are presenting issues for us there. So, but there's methodological learning that we can take, and there's relational capital that we can transplant in terms of seeking out similar sort of models, and that means that actually across the whole place, each one of those 6 is a depot for learning, and they all add a particular facet that enables us, and they're all at different developmental stages because we don't have the capacity or the resources, but they also give us a phasing and staging in terms of cultural and organisational and partnership shift, as well as working with our housing provider in terms of some of the capital that they've got in terms of their resident networks, for instance. So it's a much more meshed model.
Just on the Highfield stuff, just as a way of drawing some of the stuff that Damon said out there. So the big issue with trust in Highfields. So we've had to spend a lot of time building that trust. And again, that's not perfect. There's been a few backward steps as well as steps forward. But just a couple of things where we focus some of our efforts in Highfields is trying to build the community capacity, because there isn't the community capacity in that area. So with our Well Doncaster team through public health and our Thrive teams, we've supported the development of a new CIC in Highfields, which is actually support some former elected members who want to do that. Right. So trying to build that capacity in that area. And one of the other things that has been a gap for Highfields, it's been a bit like an isolated community. There's been no sort of space for gathering or for services to come together and engage in the community. So working with our housing provider, St Ledger, we've converted a house into a community house, which is what the community said that they wanted. So we've got a space in the community for people to come together and for services to be sort of seen in the community, which we didn't have before. And the final example, think about one of the things you said earlier about future parks and young people and off-road bags. One of the things that the community said would be good in that area would be a pump track for bags. Right. So for young people to ride. So we've enabled, using some future parks money and other things, and other resources, again, borrowing and stealing some of that, but supported by Pride in Place latterly, which again we might come on to in terms of how we knit resources together to put a pump track in place in Highfields for young people. So it's very bespoke, and it's very much dependent on what that kind of issues and the contexts are in that community. Yeah.
So, I mean, I really wish we had a lot longer to discuss this, because you're really speaking my language, and it's absolutely inspiring. And like many inspiring things in local government, I remember when I heard Hilary Cossum talking about the participal, what became the Troubled Families pilots. On the one hand, brilliant and inspiring. On the other hand, hang on, if local government isn't doing this, what are we doing? This is exactly the sort of thing that we're here for and that we're supposed to be doing. I'm going to just name, so before we finish, I want to come back to the thinking behind it. Before we started recording, Lee, you were listing a roster of absolute superstars in this area, who you've drawn from, and it'd be good to hear about and credit them, but also some of the challenges. But let me just jump to advice to others. Because what I'm hearing is, as I say, inspiring, and it's not a little bubble, it's not a little pocket, it's not a little add-on, it's just sort of suffusing through everything that you and your partners do. But that also means that it's messy and slippery and distributed, and very contextual, as you said, Damien. And when you're trying to pick this up, I spent years talking about people trying to, steal models from elsewhere, and the example of a Keystone Arch Bridge. If you don't know how to build the scaffolding, then you're just throwing stones in the air and hoping they stick. But if you understand the magic of it, then you can build something sustainable. So some people, honestly, will look at this kind of thing and pretend, or they'll create a little bubble, a little add-on, something that they can win some awards with, but it's not mainstream, it's not at the heart of things. Some disappear into the deep learning for themselves and for those who are interested, because they're blocked from real change. Some are quite dependent on the chief exec or on individuals or on a pocket of money. So, knowing that there's loads of these bear traps out there for people trying to do what you're doing, what is your main advice to others who are wanting to build real relational place-based services?
Well, I'll go back to one of the things I mentioned earlier, and again, it's the mantra that I've nicked from Greg Beer, who is the founder of Remake Learning in Pittsburgh. So that bit about learn from anywhere and everyone, and usually those are serendipitous engagements, as it was with Greg. But we've just finished our 2-week Remake Learning Festival, which is in parallel with Pittsburgh, which has had over 300 businesses and local organisations doing a radical community learning, because learning is a commodity that we want to see move to scale, and the best way to do that is to inculcate it in an early age in a whole family setting, because that's the context in which people live and therefore learn, but at the same time inspire and excite. But his mantra is start with where you're at, work with who you've got, and make small bets, because you slowly and iteratively build that capacity and that overall relational sort of group think, if you like, about this is the cultural way in which we do things around here. So that's one of the key things. The second thing is that, I think it is about conditionality. Yeah, you need to understand the conditions and that they're not presenting everywhere the same, and you do have to make choices. You can't do everything all at once everywhere. Yeah, but the other piece is have a deep understanding. Yeah, but don't make that the total objective. Yeah, because you've got to just start stuff. Yeah, and you've got to go where the energy and the commitment is, and that's a big challenge around partnership, because there are lots of other imperatives and lots of other sort of pressures and constraints. And how do you get a good enough consensus to just break free from the inertia of the way in which we normally do these things? And the irony, of course, is you can be a zealot in somebody else's backyard, but it's a lot harder to do it in your own. Yeah. So the other thing is you've got to have the credibility to work in your own organisation and change it. And we've gone through what we've called a functional realignment, which sounds like an orthopaedic procedure, but actually we've been pragmatic. We've not done big organisational change. We've created a chief exec's directorate, which has business to business to sort of customer services in there, and that includes public health, it includes customer services, it includes the Thrive services. So in other words, we're creating a centre of gravity as well as a critical capacity and mass that says, tell you what, we're going to lead by example across the whole organisation, where there are some heavy duty directorates that are driven by more regulatory expectations, but at the same time we're connecting into and sort of building off the back of their co-producing, co-developing families first initiatives, which have got a sort of a practice-led approach and process-led approach, but are utterly committed to the Thrive model. And not only that, we've built a commitment across all of the Team Doncaster partners in terms of our Thrive pledge, haven't we, Lee? So that this is a language, because one of the other key things is if you talk in different languages, and we're talking about accessible language here, if it doesn't say what it says on the side of the can and you can't see and feel it, then it becomes that, well, it might as well be a piece of confabulation from AI.
Absolutely. Some of the other critical things in the structure that Damien's described in Chief Execs is our HR and OD team. So in terms of an OD focus that we talked about earlier, that's sitting alongside policy, that's sitting alongside communications, that's sitting alongside our Thrive teams, etc. It gives those change levers, if you like, that opportunity to mesh, and then we give the organisation and the partnership a consistent sort of message and a consistent approach across those change levers. I think Damien's point about families first is a really good one, because what we've tried to do with the Thrive model is, you mentioned about an infrastructure and a scaffold. It is that, because whether it's families first, pathways to work, pride in place-based budgets, we could list a whole range of national policy initiatives. What we're trying to do is use that infrastructure and that scaffolding to help colleagues get to communities, because that's where they are, that's where the work is, that's where the insight is. So it becomes that way of working. And again, it's not perfect, but that's the journey that we're on.
And I think there's three other quick points, which is an ex-colleague of mine would use, I was going to say flowery language, literally. He'd say, you need to knead the dough, and you also need to mould the clay. Yeah. So in other words, coming back to families first, you wrap things into your local context where, I think there's far too much, well, there's not enough policy development nationally. That's for others. But, national policy never mandates what matters. And we've got the confidence to set our own policy locally. That's important. But the other key important point is the authorising environment and making sure that there's ownership by the mayor in this case and members and other critical governance structures across Team Doncaster. And I think that's really, really important for us, because otherwise, they'll default to, and we're obviously critically important in this, the sort of quarterly resource and performance and risk management cycle, and then they'll say, yeah, but you're 85% within tolerance on these indicators, but it doesn't seem to be making much difference to people's lives, which is one of those killer questions, in which case, build off the back of that challenge, which we have done, and that sort of leans into where we are at the moment around get the metrics right, let's measure the right things if we need to. So, elements like the level of relationality is a key factor. Well, what does that look like if we're putting that into our framework? And have a massive cull of the metrics that don't matter.
Brilliant. Final question then, but I'm going to be sneaky and make it a two-parter. Can you each name, please, the biggest challenge you faced and your main sources of support? Where have you drawn strength from in your journey?
Well, you asked us earlier to name check some of the intellectual and other practice and policy. So, Toby Lowe and Mark Smith have been an innovation. Hannah Hasselgraves as well. When I read their complexity book in early 2024, I made immediate contact. I've been looking at complexity in public services for 25 years, and that was the most logical and sensible and accessible articulation of it, underpinned by human learning systems theory. That has been a core. The others talked about Tony Hodgson and Bill, who did the Three Horizons, Bill Sharp. And really important, the asset-based community development in terms of Cormac Russell, but also if we're looking at sort of neighbourhood networks, then we've been working with colleague. Do you want to just say, we didn't talk about that, did we, Lee? We were going to.
No, Simon Duffy.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah.
It's really, really influential in terms of the whole citizenship perspective, and Simon's starting a centre for neighbourhoods and citizenship, and he's starting that in Doncaster. So what we've tried, and we've also had Daniel Christian Val, Damien as well, from
in terms of regenerative thinking. Yeah, and I think the other thing I would give credit to, and he's not with us anymore because he's retired, but Dr. Rupert Suckling, who was our ex-DPH, he brought the Well North initiative, which has manifested itself now for over 10 years as well Doncaster, but community health, which has driven us into the space in terms of asset-based community development. So there's an eclecticism about all of this, but then the other bit is, how do you provide a coherence between these approaches? Yeah, and also talks about nested minimum viable systems, the sort of Beer and Ashby sort of models, and Gerald Midgley models, those cybernetics which are coming back into fashion, which I know you've got particular interest in. So when we talk about the 5 levels, these aren't just abstractions, as I say, but they're not. We're not. You've probably gathered that what we look to is to see where the points of intersection and not just academic integration, but practical application for us, and that there is a thread to all of this. And I suppose the bottom line is what emerges out of this is a sort of level of systems intelligence, and that comes back to knowledge, and particularly when we're talking about augmented knowledge and the use of AI. And one of the latter things that we've been developing is how does that manifest itself as typologies for future council, and the municipal brain at the heart of that, in terms of the world of AI that we're moving into, which is the exciting piece at the moment. And how does that then look at how you reshape your regeneration as one of the newest cities in the north? I think it's a very exciting but equally challenging. And when you're asking us what's the biggest challenge, for me it's cognitive loading. I need some time to give my brain a rest.
I can see that.
I agree with that. Totally agree. And the other thing is patience, because people, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. Everyone's very impatient for results yesterday, that you can measure yesterday. And I think if I've learned anything over the last few years, it's sticking with something. Yes, iterating it and letting it be emergent, but broadly head in the direction that you're heading, and yes, adjust as you go, but stick to that direction. And I think that's what we've done really, really well in Doncaster, underpinned by the authorising environment, because without that stability of political and officer leadership, then we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done. And as just to add, Doncaster's had a difficult history in the past. And actually what I can see, having worked in that difficult history, is how amazing and fantastic place to work it is now, that allows these things to happen versus what was in place sort of 10, 15 years ago. So I think that's really important context for any place, actually.
And I think the other challenge is understanding the pressures on individuals, cost of living in particular, the real live issues that come to us, the societal damage that has been done as a result of some of that, and actually the only way we're going to get out of this, if you like, is to inject more of that be human and be kind. Because if you can choose to be one thing, then choose to be kind. And we have a choose kindness movement, because fundamentally you want a contributory state, and that concept of reciprocity, which is, I do things because I see the need and act, not because I expect an immediate and direct reciprocal benefit out of the relationship. There's a bit of that pay forward. And I think one thing that, whilst we may structurally and process and organisationally change as a local government public service, the one thing that we've got to continue to do is to see that we've got to be the mesh that holds society together.
Well, I think we should end on that note. Thanks so much, though. It's really inspiring to me, and I hope to a lot of other people. Just the balance. You'll always find that when you get into people's actual lives in community, won't you? Between the pressures and the difficulties, but the hope and the reciprocation and the relationships and the love and the kindness. So what a great note to end on. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to. I can convince this is sustainable. I hope it can spread across the whole country. I look forward to hearing what happens next. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much, Benjamin.